Right, so welcome back to our channel where we talk about all things HR and how that impacts you, whether you're an individual or a business. And today I'm going to talk you through the timetable for the changes from the Employment Rights Bill. Now, if you've been listening to our content, you know that this is one of the biggest employment law changes that we've seen in the UK. It's got the potential to make some really big changes to the way that people's rights are impacted and the way that businesses operate. So we've been waiting for some time to find out a little bit more about how and when these things are going to impact us, and the government very recently have introduced a timetable which runs through all of that. So I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Obviously quite a big document, quite a big bill, so there might be things that I don't cover in this video, but hopefully that will give you a little bit more information on when these sorts of things are going to start to impact you. So it should be no surprise that the government are pretty much planning to stage these changes out across 2026 and 2027. And if you are an employment law buff, you will know that generally employment law changes in April and October each year. So we know what that's going to look like for April and October 2026, but the changes that are proposed for 2027 are kind of just given to us in a clump at the moment. But it's probably reasonable to assume that the 2027 changes will be split across April and October. And as with anything employment law related, there has to be a caveat. So obviously the Employment Rights Bill at the time of recording this video is still making its way through the House of Lords. That means that at the moment the bill hasn't been agreed, and there is still scope for a lot of change. So recently we saw pushback from the Lords in terms of the unfair dismissal rights that the government are planning to put through via the bill. So I suppose what I'm saying is everything I'm telling you right now is relevant as of now. I'll continue to post updates so that people are aware of any changes that come through, but this is the information that we've got right now in terms of how and when these changes will come into force. So the plan for April 2026 is to bring in 4 specific changes from the Employment Rights Bill. Now those are collective redundancy awards, changes to paternity leave and unpaid parental leave, changes around whistleblowing procedures, and also changes to statutory sick pay. So in terms of collective redundancy awards, this change is around the penalty that employers will have to pay if they fail to consult with people properly. So at the moment, that penalty is 90 days pay per employee, but when this change comes in, it will move up to being 180 days pay per employee. So not something that will, definitely something that will impact individuals if they're not consulted with properly, but something that employers in particular need to be aware of. But to be fair, just do things correctly and you don't have to worry about these kind of fines and things like that. But that's a change, or the first change that we're looking to see from the Employment Rights Bill. Change number 2 will be around paternity leave and parental leave. The bill proposes to make those things available from day one. So that will be the first set of day one rights that we see coming into force from the Employment Rights Bill. Much like redundancy, whistleblowing is another one where we're going to see a change to the financial penalties if people get things wrong. So the bill is proposing to double the potential financial awards that people can be provided with if things go wrong. The biggest change that we're likely to see in April 2026, though, is around statutory sick pay. So the bill proposes to abolish the lower earnings threshold and get rid of the concept of waiting days. So that really changes the way that we manage and deal with sick pay in the UK. So employers, you need to be aware of that in terms of how you start managing sick pay. If you need to make changes to your systems, processes, etc., I would probably start thinking about doing that now. But equally, employees, you need to be aware of this change because that will impact your sick pay and how you are paid. And if you want more information on sick pay, I've done a couple of videos on that, so do feel free to have a look on the channel. Now, in October 2026, we are going to see quite a few changes coming through from the bill. I'm not going to cover them all. I'm just going to cover the top 3 that I think it's useful for you to know about. But what I will also do is I'll pop a link to the document that covers the current timetable from the government, so that if you want to have a look through and see the other things that I'm not covering, you can have a quick look there too. So the big one to be aware of for October 2026 is the change to the employment tribunal time limits. So at the moment, if you're looking to bring a tribunal claim, you can only really do that until kind of 3 months after said event had happened. So you've got like a 3-month window to be able to raise a claim. What the new bill proposes to do and what the government are saying they'll change from October 2026 is that time period. So rather than it being 3 months, it will be a 6-month period. Now that is really important for both employees and employers to be aware of, because as an employee, you've got more time to be able to bring that claim. But as an employer, again, there's a bigger time for someone to be able to bring a claim. So everybody needs to be very clear and aware of those timetables. Now, I think we're probably going to see a bit of an increase in terms of people being able to bring claims, because I think this is one of the things where people don't necessarily know or understand the timescales and when they can bring claims. If we change that timescale, there's a potential for that to bring or give rise to more claims coming through, right? So I think this one is probably one of the biggies that both employers and employees need to be aware of. It changes slightly the way that we kind of manage employee relations cases, although saying that, if there's a case, there's a case, kind of doesn't really matter the timescales that people have. But it is going to be quite a big change. We've had these timescales for quite some time. So sorry, I've said time quite a lot there, haven't I? But it'd be interesting to see how that works out and pans out in practice. We're also going to see a change in relation to sexual harassment. So employers will be required to take all reasonable steps to stop third-party harassment within the workplace. Now, obviously, nobody wants there to be sexual harassment in the workplace, whether it's via a third party or anyone really. So my advice would be, as just a good employer, that you're looking to put things in place to stop this now. It shouldn't be that you're prompted by the Employment Rights Bill to make those things, to prevent those kind of things. I think it's just a good practice thing to do. But obviously this will be enshrined in law from October 2026 as things stand. And the final one is a change around the fire and rehire rules, and the bill proposes to generally stop the fire and rehire practice, and unless there are specific, very kind of extenuating circumstances. So for those of you who don't necessarily know, fire and rehire is a practice that was kind of had a light shined on it by the P&O Ferries case, but effectively there are certain circumstances where your employer can terminate your contract of employment and only re-engage you if you sign up to new terms and conditions. And obviously that's fraught with a lot of issues and some necessarily some moral things that people need to think about, and the government aren't particularly happy about it. So as of October 2026, to kind of bolster the guidance that we've had around fire and rehire recently, it will be pretty much prohibited for people to use those practices unless there are some pretty good extenuating circumstances that they can explain. So a positive change there. So I think as a HR professional, it's never been something that I would ever advise a client to do, to utilise fire and rehire. Just doesn't feel right, doesn't sit right. And you end up with employees who are probably a little bit burnt and frustrated by the process, understandably. So you really mess with people's kind of morale and their engagement by utilising these processes. So it's good, I think, from my personal opinion, to see things like this being outlawed and prohibited via the Employment Rights Bill. And then we come on to 2027. So the government have lumped quite a lot of the changes from the Employment Rights Bill into 2027. And I think some of that is probably born from a lot of employers being quite concerned about a large number of changes being made all in one go and just not necessarily being able to cope. But also just giving people time to bed in and deal with and understand the changes that we're making. Because as I said at the beginning, this is quite a big change to the way that we do things in the UK. So I'm supportive of the government planning to kind of phase these things in, but as always, I think people need guidance and as much information and clarity as possible to be able to put these things in a way that works. So as before, there are quite a lot of changes that the government are looking to phase in 2027. I'm not going to cover all of them in this video. I'm just going to give you the top few that I think it's useful for you to know about. But as I said before, I'll pop a link in the comments so that you can see the full document and make sure that you're abreast of all of the different changes that are going to be made. So the biggie, and the one that I've been talking about for quite some time, is the change to unfair dismissal rights. And as of 2027, via the Employment Rights Bill, the Labour government are planning to make it that unfair dismissal is something that is people are able to claim from day one. At the moment, as it stands, employees have to have 2 years service to be able to claim that. And that's always been a little bit of a debate within the HR community, because there's that notion of, is it fair that people can only claim unfair dismissal after 2 years if actually they've been unfairly dismissed? If something unfair has happened, it feels a little bit odd that people can't claim it until 2 years service. But equally for employers, if they've hired someone and things just haven't gone right, then the view is that there needs to be some sort of protection for employers, because sometimes you just make the wrong hiring decision. But if people have unfair dismissal rights from day one, that kind of goes out the window. So there's definitely quite a bit of debate that's been going on about unfair dismissal rights. Very recently, in the House of Lords, Lord Sharp has pushed back on this and said, actually, we think unfair dismissal rights should be available from 6 months rather than from day one and rather than from 2 years. So trying to strike a little bit of a balance, really, between what the government are proposing and what the current position is. So whilst the government timetable says that this will happen in 2027, and initially it was proposed as being a day one right, there is still some debate on that. So as soon as there's more of an update on that, I'll let you know. I think I can't see the government backing down on making changes to unfair dismissal rights. It's been one of those big things that they've been talking about. But I think we probably are going to see a little bit of compromise in terms of whether it's a day one right, a 6-month right, or where we end up there. So watch this space on that one. We're also going to see a change in 2027 around bereavement leave. So at the moment, there's nothing in statute that says that companies have to pay people bereavement leave. But hopefully, if anybody has had the misfortune of dealing with a bereavement, hopefully you've experienced that most companies in the UK pay something towards bereavement leave because it's just the right thing to do. So hopefully this isn't one that's going to impact businesses too much, because I would like to think, I always try and hope for the best, but I'd like to think that most companies are doing this anyway. But in 2027, that will become something that people will legally have to provide, employers will legally have to provide. So from my perspective, my personal view, I've been lucky enough that when I've had bereavements and kind of difficult times in my life, the companies that I've worked for have been very obliging and, you know, provided bereavement leave, and pretty much in every circumstance have gone above and beyond. And that experience when you're going through something really difficult is just everything that you need at the time, right? So hopefully others have felt that too, but we are going to see this legal change now, which means that companies will have to provide it. And 2027 will also see the Employment Rights Bill banish what the government are calling exploitative 0 hours contracts. So unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous employers out there who use 0 hours contracts in a way that just isn't great. And the government obviously are not happy about that and want to make sure that there are some provisions so that people are protected. Quite an interesting one. So whenever I do content on YouTube or on TikTok around 0 hours contracts, people are quite in favour of them. There are a lot of people who and companies who use them in a way that is positive. It works for people. It allows them to have kind of some flexibility around their kind of day-to-day life. But unfortunately, there are these other companies who do things like call a bunch of people in to do a shift and then just send everybody home when they've got enough people. That means that those people who don't get a shift are obviously treated pretty poorly. They're probably wasted time and money travelling in. I mean, I've not had the misfortune of having to work with companies like that, but I'm aware that there are people that operate that way. So the government are just trying to make sure that these things are outlawed and people are treated fairly effectively. I do think we probably need a little bit more clarity around what their view is of exploitative 0 hours contracts. I think there's kind of previously been a bit of a push to get rid of them completely, but as I say, there are a lot of people who utilise them and see them in a positive light. So we probably just need to find a bit of a balance in terms of people using them fairly and people being able to make claims or do things if they're kind of treated poorly. So interested to see how that one pans out. Love where the government are coming from, but I think it's just finding a balance to, you know, making sure that we don't kind of demonise those kind of contracts, because there are a lot of people who utilise them in a positive way. Now, there are a lot of other things that the government are planning to introduce from 2027 as part of the Employment Rights Bill. As I said, I'm not going to cover them all here, but there are things relating to gender pay gap reporting, menopause action plans, changes to rights for pregnant women, also changes around flexible working. So lots of things. If you're interested in that stuff, as I say, have a look at the link that I'll pop in the comments below. But I would have thought, because there's quite a large mass of changes that they're looking to make in 2027, we'll see them spread across the April and the October in the normal way that we do with employment law. So that is it. Now, I hope that's a helpful overview of when the proposed changes from the Employment Rights Bill are likely to hit. Now, as I say, everything is proposed. The bill hasn't gone through the Lords yet, hasn't all had the royal stamp of approval, but I will keep posting content to make sure that you guys are up to date, and hopefully that just gives you a nice overview of when the key things are likely to hit. Now, if you've got any comments, please do pop them down in the comments box below, and if there's any thoughts or any particular topics that you would like me to cover, then again, put them down in the comments box. Can't promise anything, but I will do my best to help. Thank you so much for watching and so much for listening. Really appreciate your eyes and your ears, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.